All right, we're continuing our review for the Constitution test. Previously, we've had notes on the overview, second set of notes on Article 1, and now we're going to do some notes on Article 2, the executive branch, getting ready for the Constitution. Let's see if you remember the stuff we've learned before. How old do you have to be to run for the House? Okay, 25. How long a resident? 7 years. How many members of the House are there? 435. Who's the presiding officer? Speaker of the House. What's the term of office? 2 years. In the Senate, 30 years old. How long a resident? 9 years. How many senators are there? 100. Who's the presiding officer? The President of the Senate. Who's the Vice President? The term of office, 6 years. Okay, the President, how old do you have to be? Okay, you're going to learn these: 35, 14 years a resident. The President has to be native born, and he's elected for 4 years. Okay, so a reminder of the first 3 articles in the Constitution are the same as the 3 branches of government that we've studied. Okay, so the first article is about the legislative branch, the second article is about the executive branch, and the third article is about the judicial branch. Now, it's significant, as we mentioned before, that the Founding Fathers put the legislative branch first, before the executive. They didn't want people to say the executive branch is most important, we have a king. They wanted the branch of government closest to the people, the legislative branch, to be Article 1. Because in Article 1, Section 9, things prohibited to Congress. I like living in a country where they said we can't grant titles of nobility. Congress can't make anyone a king or queen, a duke or duchess, prince or princess. We don't do that stuff in America. That's further proof the Founding Fathers did not want the executive branch to be Article 1. All right, so some things let's look at now. The role of the presidency, the executive branch, is to carry out the laws or to enforce the laws. We saw previously it was the job of the legislative branch to make laws, and the president and the executive branch, they carry out the laws. They enforce the laws. The president has got to be 35 years old. We looked at this to run for office. He's got to be born in America. This is the only of the major offices in the U.S. where the candidate, the person, has to be born in the U.S. The president has to be born in the U.S., and he's got to have lived here for 14 years. So if he's born in America, moved away for a long time, he has to have lived at least 14 years in the United States. The president needs people around him to advise him. And so the expression has come about, that's his cabinet. The people closest to him, his advisors, are called his cabinet. The president has Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Interior, and Secretary of State is currently Hillary Clinton, and that's the person that deals with foreign affairs. So just like the Department of Defense, that advisor deals with all the things that relate to the military, the Secretary of State deals with all the things that relate to foreign affairs. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just went to the Mideast to try and broker a deal when the Arabs and the Israelis were fighting recently. Okay, what happens if the president dies? Like President Nixon resigned from office, President Kennedy was killed in office. Of course, there's an ordered succession that goes 27 deep. Starts with the president, and if he goes out of office, it's the vice president. And if the vice president would leave office, it's the Speaker of the House that would be the next president. And after the Speaker of the House, it's the President pro tem of the Senate. So just remember president, vice president, and then the 2 heads of the 2 legislative bodies we have, the Speaker of the House, head of that, and the President pro tem. Okay, we studied the Electoral College recently, and you remember that to win the office of the president, the candidate must get 270 electoral votes. That's a majority of the electoral votes. Well, there are some situations where the candidate might not get 270. In a close race between just 2 candidates, like Obama and Romney, it would be possible for neither of them to get 270 because sometimes members of the Electoral College don't vote. It's unusual, but it's happened. So that would be one unlikely way it could happen. The more likely way it could happen that somebody wouldn't get 270 is if there are 3 or more candidates running for president. Then they could spread out the electoral votes. Maybe one had 260, one had 240, and one had 20. So nobody gets 270. If that happens, if no candidate for president gets 270 electoral votes, the House of Representatives decides who the next president is. And they can pick anybody that's running. They don't have to be beholden to the American people or anybody. They can pick who they want. One of the main jobs of the presidency is he appoints ambassadors, he appoints federal judges, he appoints Supreme Court justices. A president can only be elected twice. George Washington was elected twice. He set a precedent. All presidents after him, after they were in office 2 times, they stepped down. And then we had a depression, and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was elected a 3rd time and a 4th time. He was a popular president, but after he died, the American people said in the 22nd Amendment, you know what, we don't really want people breaking, Washington's precedent. You can only be elected twice, or up to 10 years. So that was the 22nd Amendment. The president can call on executive privilege if he doesn't want to testify before a court. And in other settings too, the president can claim executive privilege. Hey, this is too important for national security. I can't be testifying. That would be a danger to national security. So presidents are allowed to do that, to invoke executive privilege. But like all other powers that all 3 branches of government have, it's not absolute. There's checks and balances. The Supreme Court could say, yes, you are going to testify, Mr. President. So ultimately, executive privilege is not an absolute power that the president has. The president is the commander-in-chief for the armed services, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard. Even though he's a civilian, he's above all the generals. That's one of his roles. He alone is our person to go make treaties with foreign nations. He'll go there and make a treaty, but then the Senate has to approve it by a 2/3 majority, or it's not a treaty. President Obama will be giving the State of the Union address in January. The yearly State of the Union address is given because the Constitution says that the president should, from time to time, report to the Congress on the State of the Union. So that's why we have that. And as we said, the president appoints ambassadors and judges. There's a picture of the 100 members of the Senate. They have to approve most presidential appointments. There's just a handful they don't approve. When the president picks a vice president, that doesn't need to be approved by the Senate or the Chief of Staff. A few other things, but most of the major diplomatic and judicial positions must be approved by the Senate. A reminder that the executive branch is by far the largest branch of government. Congress, has 435 people, and there's 9 Supreme Court justices, and then there's, hundreds of federal judges and appeals court judges. But there are literally millions of people that work for the executive branch. You get a small idea of that by looking at, here's a picture of the White House in the middle graphic there, the executive branch. The executive office of the president includes the vice presidency, the National Security Council, and other important agencies. Then there's all those independent establishments and government corporations like the Peace Corps, like the Environmental Protection Agency, and they all have thousands and thousands of people that work for them. Then there's the cabinet, Interior, Justice, Labor, the State Department. And so the point is, the executive branch isn't just the president. It's the entire federal bureaucracy. It's close to 2 million people. The executive branch is huge. All right, well, this ends our little podcast on Article 2, preparing you for the Constitution test.